Hi guys, what's up? It's Kim. Welcome back to my channel. This video is not going to be about opioid addiction or I guess it kind of is going to be a little bit about mental health in a sort of indirect way. But I've heard a lot floating around YouTube lately about intuitive eating, and I really wanted to come on and give my opinion on intuitive eating. Now, let me preface this video by saying I am not a doctor, I am not a nutritionist, I am not a dietitian. I am a recovering food addict. I have lost 170 pounds, and again, that does not make me an expert on food. But I have an opinion and I'm going to share it. So I also want to say I'm not somebody who puts too much stock into nutritionists and dietitians, because I have seen many in my years of disordered eating, and I have yet to meet two who say the same thing. So it kind of seems like each one, marches to the beat of a different drum. So I have a hard time with that, number one. And number two, I'm of the opinion that someone who is going to be giving nutrition advice to anyone that struggles with disordered eating should also have a background in psychology, and most nutritionists and dietitians do not. That said, let's talk about intuitive eating. What is intuitive eating? Intuitive eating is something that was developed for people who had done a lot of obsessive dieting over many, many years. Now, intuitive eating can work for some people. It can work for people that, number one, are not looking to lose a lot of weight, because intuitive eating, intuitive eating is honestly what gets most people fat. Just going to come right out and say it. In my opinion, I got fat because I intuitively, but a lot of people who have dieted for many, many years they're very knowledgeable. They can look at a piece of food, an item of food, and say, okay, that's about this many ounces, this many calories, this many grams of fat, this many carbs. And so they have this sort of built-in calculator, and they're able to tell these things. And because of that, they're able to put a meal together and be like, okay, I think this is, this fits into my caloric intake, or whatever. I don't count calories, but they're able to say this is a pretty decent meal in terms of macros. And I understand that intuitive eating isn't about counting macros, but it's about following the cues of your body. You're supposed to eat when you're hungry and stop when you're full. Again, this is something that can work with people that don't struggle with eating. But people who have disordered eating, whether you have a food addiction, you're a binge eater, whatever the case may be, we can't necessarily tell the difference. We certainly don't necessarily know the difference between head hunger and physical hunger. That can take a really long time of eating well, and a good amount of time getting professional treatment in order to be able to tell the difference between those two things. It's very, very confusing when you're in early recovery, because if you're familiar with mental health illness, your brain is a very powerful thing, and you can absolutely manifest symptoms. You can have these psychosomatic reactions, like, say, for example, someone's a hypochondriac and they can manifest these physical symptoms that aren't really there, but they're actually happening because their brain is manifesting them. That's kind of like physical hunger versus head hunger. You can actually not really be hungry. You're just experiencing head hunger, but your stomach is growling. You're feeling that empty, horrible feeling in the pit of your stomach. When you're in early recovery from an eating disorder, or you're somebody that struggles with disordered eating, those things are not easy to differentiate between. In my opinion, intuitive eating is something that potentiates the disordered aspect of obsessing over what you're eating. you constantly have to be thinking about food all day long. You constantly, am I hungry? Am I full? What's my body telling me about food right now? Like, you have to be thinking about food all the time. And when you are somebody that already struggles with disordered eating, the point is to get food off your mind, to stop obsessing over food, and to learn to live. We can't live without food, but to learn to cope with life without food, to cope with stress and triggers without food. Now, I know that not every food addict is the same, not every binge eater is the same, but we do share a lot of the same traits. And, you know, there's so many different diets out there and different ideas of what is the most healthy way to eat. And there is no right way. There is no black and white, method for losing weight. Obviously, eating processed stuff is bad, and eating whole, nutrient dense food is good. Things like that are obvious, but other than that, there is no one size fits all. Low carb, high fat, low fat. Everybody's different when it comes to that. I know people who absolutely, their bodies thrive on low carb. And I always considered myself so lucky, because when I was in active weight loss phase, for a while I decided, because I was in ketosis for a while, for 2 to 3 months I was in ketosis, and it was horrible. Oh my Lord, my mouth was so dry forever. I had cotton mouth just constantly. But after the initial, now this was after I had my gastric bypass, and you don't really have a choice. You're going to go into ketosis because you're basically on a liquid diet for a really long time. But after my body adjusted and I was able to start eating solid foods again and nutrient dense foods, I did try to do low carb for a while. And when I would get under 50 grams of carbs a day, my weight loss would stop. I maintained very, very steady weight loss when I was around 150 grams of carbs a day. So I always consider myself lucky, because I love carbs, that my body just responded better to having more carbs in my diet. But the point of that is just that everybody's different. Everybody will respond differently to those sorts of eating plans. But I'm of the opinion that intuitive eating is a justification to continue eating badly. If I walked into, now we already know my opinion about nutritionists and dietitians, but let's just pretend I didn't say any of that, and I was somebody who was struggling with an eating disorder, and I decided to seek help and go book an appointment with a nutritionist. And I went in and they explained intuitive eating to me and said, I think this is going to be a good path for you. I would probably laugh my ass off and ask them if they got their degree at like Acme School of Nutrition or something, because I think it's ridiculous. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. I guess if you're somebody who, again, we talked about people who have been dieting for a really long time and they're able to just sort of automatically know how much they're eating. Somebody who doesn't necessarily have an eating disorder, someone who maybe struggles with, an extra 10 pounds here and there, somebody who, I just don't think that it's right for people who have eating disorders, for people who are morbidly obese. I think it's another justification to eat whatever you want. It's not something that can logically work when your hunger signals are all over the place. It's going to take, there's no set time, but at least months upon months of treatment in order for you to be able to recognize the differences between, head hunger and physical hunger, for you to recognize why it is that you want to run to food. I say that because once you've, something will happen during your day, and depending on what your addiction is, whether it's food or drugs or alcohol, something will happen and it'll trigger you. And sometimes it's very obvious what that trigger is, and sometimes it's not obvious at all. So it takes a really long time to sometimes to figure out what it is that triggers you and to either avoid those triggers or figure out how to work through those triggers. And that's something that just does not coincide with intuitive eating. It just doesn't. So I'm going to wrap that up. I just wanted to give my opinion on it. And this video is not directed at anybody specifically. I've probably seen like 15 videos in my recommended section in the last week about intuitive eating. So, I just wanted to give my opinion, and I am going to end with that. I hope you guys have a great night, and I will talk to you later. Bye.